All right. Well, welcome everyone to the umpteenth JournoDAO town hall, and just want to say welcome to folks who might be watching this later on YouTube. This is kind of where a lot of the action in our community happens. We do have a Discord and all the requisite Web3 platforms, but kind of in an effort to be a little more open and accessible to those who are maybe Discord allergic, since we've got plenty of people who aren't, full on Web3 natives here, and that's who we're hoping to reach out to more. That's why we're doing this on Zoom, and we also have a Twitter Spaces every Thursday. But definitely do go check out JournoDAO.xyz. And we also have a new onboarding system coming up pretty soon that I think you'll find in our Twitter profile. But for now, check out the website. There is a link there where you can join, and it leads to a very, very short questionnaire. And you fill that out just to make sure that you're human, and we'll let you through to the Discord where the rest of the magic happens. So there we go. That's my kind of little intro for today. So we've got a couple of people who are new to these calls, so maybe we can just start off with a really quick round of introductions. Crystal, how about you go first?
I'm Crystal. I'm one of the founding members here. I spent many years as a photojournalist, started off as a staff photographer, switched into more corporate work and all that stuff to pay the bills. Currently in academics again. I'm a full-time student studying yoga and religion.
Cool. I'll go next. Yeah, my name's Eric Mack. I am one of the co-founders of this little community here. Been a freelance journalist for about 25 years, and got into Web3, I guess, in the last 2 years. And I've just kind of seen a lot of potential for it to improve journalism, beyond just reporting on crypto and blockchain, but to maybe actually implement some of these tools at even like small town newspapers around the world. So that's kind of why I'm here. And maybe I'll throw it, if you're available, Blake, to talk. We met Blake at O&A in Los Angeles. So good to see you again. Thanks for hopping on here. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Great to see everybody. Great to see you again, Eric. My name is Blake Stoner. I'm actually based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm the founder of a grassroots news agency called Bingle. Actually wearing one of our hoodies right now. It's a Web3 grassroots news agency. So basically we're helping newsrooms expand their coverage in underrepresented areas. You can think of us basically as building like the grassroots Reuters, except like we train local experts in underrepresented areas on how to report, and we do like with mobile technology, and we verify the information they submit, the content they submit with Web3 technology, and everything. So basically we're really focused on building a decentralized news organization to really help support the local news ecosystem. And I'm also a Knight Fellow at the Craig Newmark J School's news innovation, executive program in news innovation. So really just excited to be a part of this community and just want to grow with everybody.
Awesome. Welcome. Glad you could make it. How about Keith or Nick?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm making a bagel, but I'll be on video soon. Yeah, I'm Keith Axline. Was in the media journalism space at Wired Magazine and Medium for a decade, and then now I'm a software developer, so I'm kind of interested in how the technology of Web3 can solve all the, not all, but some of the important ones, some of the important problems that I saw when I was kind of in the trenches.
Cool. Glenn, you want to take the mic if you're able?
Sure, yeah. Hey guys, I'm Glenn. I'm building a decentralized media protocol called MEME, MEM.WTF. I'm pretty deeply involved with a couple other communities. One is called Kernel, which is kind of a decentralized university. I spent a lot of time there. And then another's, I live in Oakland, California, and we're starting to think about how to onboard Oaklanders into Web3. And so thinking a lot about how to do that through kind of media use cases with a bunch of other folks. Previously, I worked in Web2, did venture capital stuff, a bunch of other things. But yeah, I was excited about what you guys are doing and thinking a lot about from the technology side of kind of how do communities tell their own stories, curate their own stories? What are kind of the ways that we decide what media goes on our records within different communities, and how do we do that through agreements effectively? So I'm thinking a lot about these different components, and that kind of overlap with a lot of what it seems like you guys are doing. So yeah, excited to learn more and see where we might be able to plug in and help provide some tools as we go. So I think that would be cool.
Great, welcome. Yeah, glad to have you here. Hopefully, as we kind of roll through what we've been working on, hopefully it makes sense. But feel free to hop in and we can clarify some stuff if it's confusing to help get you up to speed. I don't know if Nick is at a place where he can talk. He's often on his own private island, sitting on piles of cash, from what I've heard. But it looks like he's there.
I'm here. Hi, I'm Nick. I've been around the crypto space for a really long time. And the last 2 years I've been kind of working in first digital marketing and then doing an on-chain analysis to look at how investigative journalism could be paired with some of those types of methods to get like a new investigative journalism going.
Awesome, thanks. So we got a few other core members that are traveling or shuffling kids back and forth right now who may or may not join us later. But we don't have do we have a newsletter to go through, Crystal?
I punted it over to Keith at the last minute, so I can go through the draft if you want.
Sure.
Because my ass is behind.
Yeah, sorry, sorry about that. Normally I would have been able to do it, but I was just away. So
That's okay. I threw it to you at like the very last minute. I normally do it in the morning. So during our podcast, I was like, oops, I didn't
No
plan
worries.
ahead. Yeah. So basically we kind of combined 2 weeks because prior to that, it was a little slow. So the last town hall, I had to hop off too early, but it was a fabulous conversation. So definitely, if you can, the link is in the newsletter once it goes live. Go back and listen to some parts of that or all of it. Eric brought up a really good point about stories from COVID in communities that have gone unreported or underreported. And Eric, hop in if I'm getting this wrong. Then linked it to like the WPA type projects that came out of the Great Depression, where the government funded journalists to go and storytellers and artists to go out into communities and gather stories. So it was kind of the premise, and that kind of led down to some really good rabbit holes. We did a couple spaces. I just started running those, so hopefully I'll get a little more organized and they'll be a little more cohesive. So the spaces are linked in there. You can go listen to them. Tomorrow's I'm actually really excited about. Keith and Evan from Factland are going to have a conversation with us about disinformation and democracy and how we can use decentralization to hopefully address some of those issues. We got a grant from Ocean Protocol, and this is like a 3-phase process. So this is phase 1. And basically this will cover doing research to see the viability of creating a news marketplace. So, and I'll let Eric, do you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, so these are basically all the things I had to discuss today. So yeah.
Okay, so we can do it in a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then Spencer, who I forgot to put this in the newsletter. So Keith, if you want to add this in, because he is in DC right now. He's in a lot of DAOs, and he's part of the DAO coalition right now, and they're meeting with politicians, I think right now actually, to talk about some of the lobbying efforts to protect DAOs and our ecosystem. He also created a photojournalism marketplace using Artiva and started building it out. And the premise is that we can bring in photojournalists and curate some of their NFTs and put them into a marketplace that then also helps fund a tiny portion will go to the treasury for JournoDAO. It's also a way to onboard photojournalists from Web 2 into Web 3. And so in that conversation, we started talking with Artiva on the back end, and they're going to give us access to a beta that they're getting ready to roll out, so we can help test it and then hopefully help craft it a little more towards what we need. So I'm really kind of excited about that. And then he also installed the DAO Lens thing that Eric was talking about for the onboarding process. So that should be live soon, if it's not already. And then Eureka John started created a collaboration between Crypto Sapiens and us to create a mini podcast series called DiGiorno. And we recorded the first episode this morning. So it's going to be a 4-part series on journalism and Web3. Today's topic was basically what is journalism. So we got a little bit into the history. And there he is right there. Your ears must have been burning. We're just talking about you. So yeah, so that we have 3 more episodes to record, and it was a lot of fun. And we're kind of thinking this might be the precursor to our own podcast, doing a regular thing here because it's a blast. Eric published an article on CNET about scientists creating gamers out of brain cells that could play digital games. So that was cool, and like way over my head. I'll let you talk about that one. And then Keith, you're running with the Journo token. I'll let you update that. Also, Keith is leading the conversation on creating a Mastodon server and how to bridge people over from Twitter to Mastodon if Musk decides to destroy our public town square. So we have a backup. And yeah, that's all I've got so far. So yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Crystal.
Yeah.
I did want to just pause here just to see if there's anything specific that Glenn or Blake that you wanted to bring up. I just want to give you the floor for a second if you had anything particular you wanted to mention, so that you don't necessarily have to stick around for the entire time if we start to bore you.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think partly I'm just kind of listening and feeling out what are you guys up to, and kind of getting a sense of where this is all going. I think there's a lot of things spurring in my mind of like what are the different ways to support these kind of infrastructure. I think even thinking about Mastodon, there's lots of other kind of peer-to-peer social stuff going on, and thinking about how to plug various communities into those things. So I think a bunch of these things are all relevant in my head, but yeah, mostly just trying to get a sense for whereabouts you guys are thinking of this going, and then how I might think about contextualizing that for our whole set of stuff we're working on. But yeah, would love to. Yeah, I'll take it in, and then I'll probably come back with some more stuff.
Gotcha. Awesome.
And I can take a stab at kind of setting the playing field here. I think there's a few like project tracks that are consolidating, and we're kind of thinking of organizing the website to reflect this, kind of like Gitcoin, where they have their grants, they have their bounties and passport, and so we're kind of thinking we have like a services project / working group / whatever, where we're realizing we're in a unique position to guide people through the process of becoming a Web3 like media company, or just learning about stuff, since we're at this unique intersection between these two kind of fields. And then that would be like, I don't know, people could like a consulting type service. And then there's this incubator idea where we want to provide support to just different experiments in the space, some of which have come from like internal members. Like I think we consider Factland like an incubator project, but it's really like our place to say, like, if anyone has an interesting idea, like, let's put it there and try and help them with it. And then we have like the professional network idea, where whether you're you even know what Web3 is. If you're a journalist, we want to, bring you in and just give you a community. There aren't a lot of like great journalist communities out there. And so, we think we have a unique take on it. And then that can be a way to kind of introduce people to the Web3 principles and what's possible. And I think a lot of journalists don't even realize that there are solutions to a lot of the systemic issues that they're facing. So it takes a while to realize that, I think. And am I missing anything? I guess there's like the events as well, like putting on onboarding events and just going to conferences, that sort of thing.
Yeah, super helpful over. It spurred one other thought I'll just kind of mention to you guys, which is been thinking a lot about collaborative publishing as a framework for just how do we think about organizing decentralized media organizations more broadly, and largely like every human organization ends up being a decentralized media organization to some degree of like how do we curate for ourselves what goes on our shared record, ends up having a lot of these kind of similar patterns of who can propose, a contributor might propose that something goes on record. An editor in consortium with other editors and whatever logic a community chooses might decide whether that meets some criteria to go on that record. And maybe a publisher gets to help determine who gets to have these different roles, who can be a reader of these things, who gets to access that record. So you start seeing a lot of these patterns, whether it's what goes into a newsletter or what item goes on a menu at a restaurant or what grants get funded by a foundation. You see a lot of these kind of similar patterns. And so I think part of my interest is in as we think about how communities can tell their own stories, curate their own stories, what goes on their record. I think it overlaps a lot with journalism as it stands and kind of many of the practices that have emerged there, but it's also this very new and different thing as to what are new ways we can create protocol systems to help folks do that for themselves too, and how do you have communities report for themselves on their own communities, curate those own stories, and then broadcast those to others. And so I think there's probably a bunch of overlap there, but it seems like how to marry some of this more new kind of bottoms up peer-to-peer media style stuff with what is traditionally happening in kind of journalism covering this space, for instance. I think there's a whole lot of overlap there, and I'm a little bit more of a structuralist technologist in that sense, but I'm sure there's going to be more things that spur off it, but that might help at least contextualize it. It's a little bit different, it seems, than some of the kind of near-term stuff, but I'm sure there'll be other pieces of overlap.
Cool. Yeah, one thing I wanted to discuss today is the idea I brought up last week that I think Keith, you missed, Crystal got about half of it, which is thinking about launching an actual decentralized reporting project, which I can launch into. But before I do that, let me see if Blake wanted to take the floor for a minute for anything at all. Did you have anything you wanted to get out there before I start monopolizing things for a minute, Blake?
Not too much. I was really just gonna kind of echo what Glenn said a little earlier. Like, I'm just happy to be here. Really just want to take in the conversation for today. If I could just understand like where, JournoDAO stands today and like how I can best contribute and just how I can, find my place and everything. And I mean, I know there was talked about like the incubation stuff. I'm obviously, working on a venture myself. That's something I'm definitely would love to talk more about. And this being like one of, if not the only major like journalism focused Web3 community that I've come across, this is a community I want to build with, because it's not too many people I can talk to about the specific challenges I'm facing that will understand and actually help guide me through some of these challenges. So that's more. It's just this, like, whenever there's some incubation talk, we'll love to figure out what how to go down that rabbit hole.
Can I add something real quick? Keith had said journalism, this DAO is helping journalists learn and understand Web3 tools. On the other side of the token, it's helping guys like me that's coming from Web3 and crypto space learn about journalism. And because I started out just trying to turn some profit, and just like a lot of people do in speculating on crypto. Then you get into DeFi and you learn about smart contracts, and you learn that there's like this huge other world of possibilities that crypto and Web3 can accomplish. And then I do have an interest in journalism, and now I'm learning deeper knowledge about journalism through these folks here, and then taking my Web3 and crypto knowledge and being able to apply that.
Yeah, the degen to regen path. I think that's what happened with a lot of us. And Blake, I want to sync up offline too. One of my mentors at UNC's photojournalism school was a huge community journalism professor, and he started something called the Durham Voice. And I talked with him this summer about decentralizing it, and I think it's right in alignment with what you're working on. So I want to sync y'all up. We can talk about that in the server.
Gotcha. Sounds good. And can you drop a link to that, like in the chat or anything, or in Discord?
Yeah. Yep.
Thank you.
Sure.
By the way, we met Blake at the Online News Association conference after we did our panel thing, and Blake came up and introduced himself and asked if JournoDAO was working with any Web3 based local journalism newsrooms. I said, do you know any? so we're pretty excited that you're already doing kind of what we've been mostly just talking about. So it's pretty cool that you're here.
Oh, and also just to add on that, Eric, I'm actually we're about to launch a pilot here in Atlanta with some local newsrooms. So we're just looking to see which newsrooms we want to work with, like for like really focus on smaller newsrooms to launch the Newswire pilot. So even those kind of conversations, I would love to have with y'all just to see how I should structure it and stuff like that.
Cool. Well, that leads rather perfectly into one thing that I wanted to follow up on today. And by the way, here's just kind of a little agenda. I'm going to jump down to the fourth item here because that's what we're already talking about. So last week, and I think, like I said, most of you weren't here. I brought up the idea of, we've been talking for a while about like what could decentralization look like in journalism, and what can all these Web3 tools do for journalism, and we've kind of been talking about it, but I've become like really interested in like, let's just go out and try to do some of the stuff that we've been just talking about in terms of actually starting a decentralized reporting project and just kind of getting our hands dirty and going for it. And the idea I brought up last week, I was just talking about how like over the last month or two, I've been speaking with a lot of people here where I live, just about kind of basically what COVID has done to our community. And like my entry point for this is I'm like particularly kind of fascinated by the labor shortage that I think everyone's familiar with it. It's happening everywhere. But began to talk to like some business owners, some workers, some homeless folks even, and just kind of getting their take on what is going on. Because in particular, my town where I live is a tourist town, and tons of people moved here during COVID. So there's like never been more people and more money here, but like stuff is closed. People aren't working, even though they're the wages are also being offered are higher than normal. And so when I started talking to business owners, about what they thought was going on, it's some pretty dark stuff. And in terms of a lot of crime, drug use, homelessness, kind of the worst explanations that you fear, I think maybe what's driving this. And there's some research that backs that up. So the thought is, well, we're a decentralized journalism organization. Why don't we try to tap into some of these tools and try to tell this story with as many decentralized contributors as possible. And that's kind of what I broached last week, and we didn't really get into how that would work or how, like, what the process would be. I do think we've got a couple of things that we've been talking about in the pipeline that could feed into this really well, whether it's the Artiva marketplace for photojournalism that Spencer and Crystal have been working on. I could see that effort feeding into this project, and then Also, we've been talking about, doing some live storytelling things, maybe at East Denver, and perhaps we could tap into this theme for that. And also, this could also be a nice thing to fundraise around for the next Gitcoin grants period, which starts on December 1st. And by the way, like it doesn't necessarily have to be around COVID. It's just that seems like kind of an easy thing that, like, because literally anyone anywhere around the world is going to have a story to tell about this, and it's going to be able to contribute to this project to kind of make sense of what's going on in the world since COVID. So yeah, that's kind of the basic pitch, and I'll just pause there if anyone's got any reaction.
Yeah, I love this idea. Like, I think I've actually talked about something somewhat similar with a few other folks in kernel that we were calling viral voices at a certain point, which was and the idea being that, like, everybody is in relation to COVID in some way, right? And so this is just an amazing starting point for some kind of decentralized story. And like, one of the ideas we had around this was having people tell their story of them getting COVID, of whatever it is, and then kind of telling the story of where they got that and who they were with and whatever that thing was, like who they may have given it to even, or who cared for them, who are all the people related to their story of COVID. And in some ways you can start seeing how this might start moving virally of who are the people that you were in that place with that also got it? They got it too. And like, what happened then for you? Like, my wife has long COVID, which is just a community that needs more stories. Like, I don't know if you've ever spent time in these forums around long COVID stuff. And half of, there's some 20 million people in the US dealing with long COVID stuff. And like, half of the posts in those forums are people convincing each other not to commit suicide. Like, it is really fucking dark. And like, it's just there's a massive Facebook group. All this is peer-to-peer stuff though, because the healthcare system is just not addressing, they don't have good answers for this stuff. So I think focusing on COVID makes a ton of sense. I think it's trying to think about what are the mechanics for how you have people be able to sign their own work of like what that meant to them, and then also connect to other people, as we're all connected in this thing. So I love the idea. I would love to work on this in any way with you in some ways, and think about what kind of tools might be necessary, because I think it's hugely important and a great place to start a lot of this storytelling.
Yeah, I think it's an amazing, like, to be able to step back and look at the big picture is huge. Like, Eric, after you talked about this at town hall the other day, I was in class and the professor was talking about asking the students about what's changed since COVID, and none of them had really good answers. So then I went in and just like started spouting things off, and everybody just looked at me. I was like, dude, that got dark. And I was like, well, there's no real repository to show like what Glenn just described, and to show the economic impact on towns. Like, the thing is just not there. And it comes back to what we keep talking about in journalism. The resources aren't there to tell the story. The decentralized aspect of storytelling at scale like this. I think it's a really important story that needs to be told and gathered in a different way than we have seen in the past. So yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I'm interested to talk about how to execute it. I think it's a no-brainer.
There's also a couple other organizations that I might think about pulling into something like this. So one of which a friend, Jen, runs this thing called Savvy Co-op, which is it's maybe 20,000 plus member co-op that effectively you can check it out. It's organizing patients and then connecting them to pharmaceutical companies and medical device manufacturers and others to then be involved in the process of the design of drugs and devices and things for those folks with those disease states. And so she was one of the ones I was talking to about this viral voices thing. There's also a thing called JournoDAO, which is pretty interesting, that has started to create IP NFTs and to fund research that is underfunded in lots of places. So where they've been focused on is VitaDAO, which is life extension research, and SciDAO, which is psychedelic research, right? And so, but a bunch of these folks are in kernel too, which is a really good convening point for a bunch of people in different places. And so I'm sure there'd be more people within kernel too that would definitely be jumping on and supportive and have different pieces of the puzzle. But those are a couple that immediately come to mind that would be probably good folks that would have angles of they'd be really interested in as well.
Yeah, now that you bring that up, part of this reminds me of JournoDAO. Do you know them? So they're trying to do like clinical grade, like genome sequencing for consumers, and then put that into like a private vault that can be queried by medical researchers. And they're part of what they're doing is trying to go after those communities. Maybe long COVID would fit in this, but also like sickle cell disease and these sort of what are classified as like rare disease. But if you actually were able to get that community together, it's pretty significant. And that's where a lot of the genetics research is the hardest to do. And so might be interesting if we wanted to stick a foot in DSci as well, like you're might be suggesting, or at least that they would, I don't know, maybe there's a partnership there where like JournoDAO handles the narratives and, but then we actually have some scientific investigation going on as well.
Yeah, I think a lot of these communities are also ones where they have been relying on each other. It's largely in Facebook groups and in forums and elsewhere else, with like they're just kind of experimenting on themselves and sharing the things that work. And this is kind of a home for some of this decentralized media thinking right now, is that like where the things that they can't find resources, can't find help, and they just have to kind of find things for each other. And so I think it's a definitely communities that are very, very adamant about trying to raise the profile of those concerns and share that information out to others who are suffering. So I think that's a really good place to start.
Yeah, I think the possibilities for collaboration on something like this are pretty endless. And I did have a thought about a place to start, which is basically that we just start by gathering our own stories, like literally from. I mean, we've already heard a few great suggestions from Glenn and from other folks. Like you said, just like kind of telling our own stories from our own lives. And I mean, that could take the form of interviewing each other, or collaborating on telling our own stories in like whatever medium or format works. And then there's an opportunity to do a little bit of I suppose hands-on journalism training, editorial training in the process. And then from there, maybe start to draw in other people from the community, draw in some of the other DAOs that have already been mentioned. And then we'll kind of build this plane as we start to get it off the runway.
Awesome. And then we're in terms of where you start publishing too. So know some folks at Medium if that's helpful, but also in terms of we've been working closely with Colin at paragraph.xyz, which is a Web3 publishing platform. And then I've also been spending time with these folks at Rlog, which is this group called Relational that is thinking about how to do it's kind of like community journaling in a certain way, which rhymes a lot with the kind of decentralized journalism we're talking about. They're just amazing people too, and so I think they'd be very game, I think, to explore some of these things as well. So like that's more just on the publishing tool piece too, in terms of what are the different places we can start there, and how Web3 to make that would also making it accessible to others to participate, to read, to do some unbased identity stuff. So you don't need a Web3 wallet to necessarily contribute. So I think there's a bunch of pieces there that we could tie together.
We can also look at the thing that Focher started building with Unlock. That's just kind of sitting there and not used. So we could pull in one of the devs that worked on that and then collab with Unlock. And basically what we were doing is trying to create a version of Paragraph, but that was more photo friendly and published from photo to mobile to blockchain. So that would also be something that we could just build our own, a good reason to build our own storytelling platform, because the framework's already there. And then I think with that, it uses some sort of Web3 ID function as well. That's baked into the Unlock headline platform that they built. So that, that's also a blank canvas we could play with.
Cool. Yeah, I think as much as you can build on top of other folks building in open ways, so you don't have to recreate a lot of what's existing, and you can get the benefits of them running in lots of those other directions. So for instance, something like building the photo pieces out better for whether it's Paragraph or Mirror or any of these other folks, like I think coming to them with a project like this, they'd be very excited to do those things together. And I don't know if you're working with Patrick and Unlock, like I think we could figure out other ways of kind of plugging those pieces together. But I think insofar as you can find ways of continuing to have others help you do the thing rather than having to do it yourselves, I think is one of the big advantages of the space.
Yeah, I used to work at Unlock. I worked at Unlock right before Patrick came on. So that's kind of how that evolved. We were looking at Paragraph for something, but there was a little bit of more centralization involved that we really weren't too keen on. With Unlock, at least, it's completely, there is no, sorry, Eric, that was hilarious. There is no, there's no centralization in the content itself. So that was one of the reasons bye Blake. We're kind of going that way. And not that we need to build anything from scratch, but if it is going to be a big comprehensive project, it is a good reason to look at that. That way there is more control over control in a decentralized, capacity. And then if there is Unlock involved, then you could really empower individuals, because then their story could be an NFT that's also connected to their wallet, that also has all the utility built in behind it. That's why I usually try to work Unlock if I can into something, because of the potential of what's possible down the road with that type of a utility NFT involved.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think we're all pointing towards the same direction effectively, where the thing's going to go, and it's just in different states at this point. But yeah.
So Eric, were you thinking of like some sort of prompt? Like, did you want to just help give people like free reign, or should they all be structured similarly? Like, what should they all have the same pieces? I don't know.
Yeah, last week Amy was on the call, and she had the good idea. She thought it would be a good idea to basically have to offer us like an optional script, so that like, particularly if there's folks that haven't really interviewed people before but are like really interested in contributing, that there's something for them to use, which I thought we could kind of work out what works well as a script by interviewing each other, basically. And by the way, I did want to mention, Keith, we could discuss this later, but I also had the thought that another potential theme that maybe could run in parallel with some other folks would be like a more Republic focused theme, which is like another decentralized reporting project on like what it looks like to take like more control of your own data. And just that would probably be more of like a educational, informative, and like how to kind of thing. But like I think you could do, just like thinking about, like, I would be able to pitch a feature on that, like to an editor, to be like, there's this group out here that's encouraging people to take ownership over their own data, and like, let's look into what that means, what that would be in process, what's possible. So these are actually kind of the two ideas I've been playing with in my head is COVID and Republic. I put those two things, I look at those two things the same.
Yeah, I'm down. I've been waiting to like capture my journey to Republic, because I started just trying to like run all of my services like from a computer in my house and like self-host everything, and it's crazy how difficult that is. And I think it's difficult in ways that we could make understandable to people, like how it's not really a viable choice. And so yeah, Republic's kind of the end result of like oh, we need something like this, or else like we'll never control our own data. So um, yeah, I think that'd be, since I don't know, that'd be a lot easier to do in a shorter timeline. And so if it's not an either or, we could do that first, since like, I don't know, we have the resources internally, and then as we kind of plan out how to execute like a more like expansive crowdsourced pandemic story.
A couple love this too. I think there's a couple things that spur to mind. One is a group that I'm in called Yeet, Y-E-E-T, that is a group of privacy focused folks that are pretty deep in the crypto space and are now moving more towards kind of policy work. And so there's a whole bunch of folks in there that I think would be really interesting to pull in on those pieces, including like folks like Holmes Wilson, who was like Fight for the Future stuff, as well as everyone from Disco.xyz, which is a big kind of data sovereignty place. So there's a bunch of folks in there that I think would be really interesting. And Anastasia and Howard, who's one of the folks that is at Lit Protocol, and Anastasia is doing a metaverse thing there. But this all came another kind of ex-kernel group of folks that's pretty interesting there that might be worth kind of diving in with on that front.
Yeah, I've wanted to talk to Anastasia for a while. She was on the Other Side podcast. Is that right? I think that's where I heard her.
She's a friend. I can definitely like connect you.
Cool. So yeah, I guess maybe we can kind of move the discussion on both topics into the Discord. This is where I get a little lost on like what would be the best tool that's available to us to organize something like this. If it's Notion or I don't even know at this point. Any thought? I mean, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, like, the conversation, I need to do this too for the conversation we had on our private DMs the other day about investor stuff. But once there's a back and forth in Discord, then I can move it over to Notion and kind of create like not a storyboard, but something very similar that could serve as like the framework that could then become the storyboard. I think once the conversations begin to grow and like links are shared and resources are shared, then I can like logically see in Notion how to structure that content. So then we can go back and say, all right, the next logical step is X. And then, here's Y. And then we head over here. So that Notion just gives me the space to basically do what I used to do when I produced. So yeah.
Yeah, I second Notion for the that's a cool thing that I can't do, but as far as like just having tasks and how they relate, and like having some sort of larger task that encompasses these things and who's responsible for what, it's really the only way to go. You need something like that for like new people who come in, want to get the lay of the land, and also just like people like me who dive in and out of different projects and then like forget what I was supposed to do and all that stuff.
And then seeing it laid out, yeah, like you said, you can assign it to people and then move it through tables, and the tables can have like what's coming next, and then delegate all the different sections, and that way you can really clearly see, and you can also put it into a calendar format as well. That's where Notion really shines. And you used to have to do it in like spreadsheets and all this other bullshit that stayed on your hard drive and no one could see. So now in Notion everybody can see it, and then we can just once it's built, it won't take long, and then you can just open it up to the community and have comment sections, or move that conversation over to the forum. And if there's any voting involved, you can have the voting say, hey, go to this page first, vote on this thing next, which avenue do we choose next, and stuff like that.
So I mean, it sounds like Zoom and Notion are two things to probably take out of the DAO treasury. I would think. We're at the point where like free and personal accounts, it's time to upgrade, play with the big boys.
Yeah, I agree, because I really want to on my agenda this week was to get the investor thing get that really started. It's a media kit essentially, and have that built out. So we can start building on that leading up to that call. And then the founders call we have tomorrow have a lot of that stuff in there. So tonight I'll probably just, hopefully tonight, build one on my personal account that we'll use for tomorrow. And then I'll transfer it over to the group account.
Sounds good. Thanks for handling all that. It gives me hives.
I don't know why I love that shit, but like, that's why I had a very brief career as a producer, because there's a nerdy side in me that wants to organize crap to make sure stories are told properly. And Notion is like just a gift. I wish it had been around back when I was doing that. So I love it. It's weird.
My cousin is a script supervisor in Hollywood. And I'm like, you have the world's like most stressful, horrible job. Like, I'm glad you love it because it seems awful. But
it was awful. I was a line producer on like one Pizza Hut commercial and I had a nervous breakdown. I'm like, how do people do this all the time? This is the most exhausting, soul-sucking, ridiculous work ever. Like, props to them. Like, wow. Yeah.
It's an interesting life where you wake up having nightmares about a hairbrush being on the wrong side of the table.
Yeah. And then like getting arrested because you didn't think of something and they're like, oh, you're the one in charge. And then like I literally on one of the shoots for Pizza Hut, I'm like, I don't even like Pizza Hut. Like, this is horrible. But like all of the crew was breaking the law in this public park. And I'm like constantly scanning for helicopters and cops. Cause I'm like, I'm the one that's going to get arrested for this shit. Cause y'all are doing dumb things. I was like, no, we're done. That's it.
You got to bring that story up when we hit DiGiorno up for a sponsorship. DiGiorno miniseries.
Totally.
By the way, Glenn, Urbit is something that comes up in these calls off and on. I think Keith is an Urbit user. It's been on my like weekend to-do list for a couple of months now of like, okay, this is the weekend we're going to dive into this thing. Because like everything I read about it is pretty exciting, but I have not yet blocked out the time to fully dive in.
It's interesting. I started hearing, so I know it from the tech side somewhat, but then I've started to hear it more from like the New York, LA intelligentsia folk that like it's started. And the thing that concerns me is that it's tied to this kind of Peter Thielian, like there's like a real reactionary kind of anarcho-capitalist thing going on there. And so I've heard noises from other folks from other perspectives about like how do we like this model though as to how do you make the friction of the peer-to-peer media thing a feature rather than a bug. Like it is the difficulty of even getting into that thing is then becomes part of like getting into the party thing. And so I think that kind of model could be something that's replicated from other more pluralist perspectives and that side too, right? So I think there's a bunch of there's a bunch more embedded in that, but I think that's why I was starting to like, oh wow, this is catching amongst a certain set of folks, and it's definitely worth paying attention to.
Yeah, the founder's kind of off the deep end, actually.
Yeah, I stayed away from it for a while because of that sort of just I couldn't even point to anything specific, but just the vibe of it was very, as you say, and so I'm actually shocked that it's still around, because when I saw them basically trying to rebuild the internet from scratch, it's like
it's certainly it's really nuts. Yeah, but then there's a lot to really appreciate about what they're building and doing, and it's just, man, there's a lot of those other noises though that I'm like, whoa, it's concerning.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the benefit of the model, is it doesn't, just like crypto, doesn't necessarily matter where it comes from, because the nature of it is neutral and open. So who knows? Sorry, what were we talking about? Oh yeah, organization, Pizza Hut, producers. Crystal, thanks for doing all the Notion stuff. That's awesome.
Sure.
Glad that you like doing it. The only thing, that's kind of how I settled on programming, is it's the only thing that I do that people look at it and go like, oh, I couldn't do that. I'm so glad that like you can do that, because I can't, because that's how I feel about like most other professions. So I'm like, all right, this is my one thing that seems like I can do.
Yeah, totally.
So there's a few other things to kind of get to here. I'll flesh out some of the items from the newsletter. The Ocean Protocol grant, and by the way, I got kicked out of the other room, you may have noticed. But the Ocean Protocol grant, the voting ended, and looks like some funds for both Republic and us. And yeah, that is basically to, like Crystal was saying, kind of do a feasibility study of what a ocean marketplace, a forkable ocean marketplace for journalists could look like. So I'm gonna wait, like it still hasn't officially been announced, and I'm actually not sure where it would be announced, but I haven't seen anything yet in their Discord server. So
they'll probably mention JournoDAO in the tweet. They did a tweet thread last time.
Oh, okay.
That's how I found out.
Okay. So yeah, and there's been a little bit of chatter that there might be some tweaks. So like once that's finalized, let's just plan to discuss more probably next week and how to move forward with that. Any other insights, Keith, into that process?
Just be sure to actually claim your tokens in the 3-week window. So I finally realized it had been a while, and so I went to actually claim it and start work on the stuff. And it said my gas was going to be like $500 when I just tried to claim it. And so that's when I reached out. I'm like, hey, is this for real? Gas is super low. It's like 8 gwei right now, and I'm having to pay 500. And so then everyone went back to try and figure out what was going on. And then finally somebody, I don't know why that would manifest itself in high gas, but I guess that's the mechanism that they use to dissuade people from claiming after the window. So
that's weird.
Yeah.
So did you claim it for 500 gas?
Fuck no.
Okay, good.
Reapplied for a new grant.
Cool. So yeah, that is happening. I did just wanna let me see if I can share this. I did. So we also at the end of the last call last week, we kind of went through some funding options, some grants, and other things that were coming up, and kind of had a discussion about some options there. And then I did a little more research just to see what is actually coming due in a timely manner. And I just created a JournoDAO funding calendar, just to kind of keep track of things like when you need to claim Ocean Protocol tokens, maybe. I'll be sure to put that on here. And there's not a whole lot that actually is timely. Most things are rolling deadlines. There is I did put this on here, Crystal. You shared this Founders Circle application that seemed kind of cool and worth getting involved in. I mean, that from what I gather, that's basically kind of like a networking thing that then feeds into the next Gitcoin round. And like I was saying earlier, I think we could do a lot more kind of planning and organizing around this Gitcoin grant, particularly if we want to maybe specifically raise for a reporting project. And then the only other, yeah.
Did you see the survey that Gitcoin sent out?
No.
It sounds like they're contemplating not doing the next round in order to ship
The grants thing?
the protocol. And so one of the questions on the survey was how would you feel about that? I would be angry, or that's fine, or whatever. So
When did that go out? When did you see it?
maybe last week. It
Okay,
was pretty soon after. It might have been sitting in my inbox for a while.
okay.
I
Yeah, I
remember
went
seeing
in,
something about that, but I don't remember exactly what it said.
I mean, there was the thing about that they were going to be doing the grants protocol. I saw that. I went into the Gitcoin Discord earlier, and I mean, there was talk of actual dates for round 16, that it's December 1st through the 15th. So, I mean, hopefully that means that they're going forward with it, but I'll have to see if I have that survey
I could
somewhere.
have asked him last night at the Boulder blockchain pedantic meetup that I went to. Just asked him.
Owaki was there.
Yeah, he was the one doing a lot of the talking.
So it's more of a blockchain entourage meetup.
Yeah, like it's a weird little inner circle. I mean, as an anthropologist, it just fascinates me. So next time I'm actually going to get there early enough to participate in part of the conversation and then stay long enough to go get beers. But last night I was just not like, I literally went to a meetup and spoke to no one. So I was like, okay, we're done. It was weird.
Yeah, there's a weird like jockeying for position type of vibe, where it's like,
Yeah.
once the person is like famous and has resources and starts talking or whatever, then it's like everyone's calculators of like where they fit in the hierarchy go on, and it freaks me out.
It wasn't as bad as the one we saw at MCon.
Okay.
It wasn't that bad, but you could definitely see that dynamic or feel it a little bit. I was curious to see what everybody else's role is in that room, because a lot of this stuff does come out of that room, comes out of Boulder. So so I might just be a fly on the wall for a while in that room till I get to know somebody that I can speak with. But what's the Mozilla Foundation? Because one of my colleagues at Unlock, she was a recipient of that like 2 years ago or a year ago. So I can actually tap her and get info on that.
So this is a grant I came across that I told Keith about, because frankly it's a little better suited for Republic, but it's might be worth exploring doing a JournoDAO application, and it's this right here. Yeah, so organizations collecting data for the public benefit. So obviously that has like Republic written all over it, but we've definitely talked about, and in particular with the Ocean Protocol project, talked about different ways that we could collect the data that journalists produce, and that comes out of the reporting process and the publication process. There's actually a lot of different data sets that are thrown off of that beyond just like your feed of articles. Yeah, and that the due date on that, if we want to really dig into it and do an application, is November 11th. And it starts in January.
Let me know if we move forward on that, and I'll reach out to Amber and just pick her brain on how to structure it, because I think she did it for monetization of the web, but she had a year-long fellowship with them, and then she's still close with that whole network. So
Yeah, I'm definitely going to do one for Republic, and I don't know, depending on, might be interesting to explore like what JournoDAO would present on its own, but then if there's like the goals established through the JournoDAO proposal could be executed with like Republic technology or something, there might be like a partnering there.
Yeah, and that's probably, I mean, if that makes any sense, like those kind of applications are typically stronger too. Yeah, Glenn, I've looked at Artisan a little bit, and it's pretty interesting. That's another one on my list that I think it would be interesting to dig into. It seems like they're like, so I'm a little familiar with their background. They're like a crowdfunding platform, like a Kickstarter sort of thing. And in like the last year, I think they've done basically a pivot to to be Web3. Artisan.fund, that's in the chat. Yeah, that's an interesting one as well. But I didn't put it on the list for JournoDAO since it seemed to be more geared towards like individual creators. But it is interesting.
Yeah, another thought on some of this stuff is like nouns is just like a very interesting place for funding. And so thinking about projects that are at all nounish or could be positioned as such could also just be a way of starting to get a foothold in some of these things and telling the stories of Web3 and so on.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's so we talked a little bit about public nouns last week, which is a fork of nouns. But like I don't fully understand the nouns ecosystem. Like, what are you envisioning when you bring that up?
Yeah, so the thinking there is like all the nouns that are, it's these generated PFPs that drop one a day and still auction off every day, and they still, I think their treasury is still pretty significant, maybe $40 million US at this point still. And so the idea there is largely people propose ideas that propagate nouns IP, which is just the idea of nouns with these little figures that they have there. And so you can propose to them pretty much anything that fits that mode. So somewhere else.
I love the dog in the background.
Yeah, I mean, well,
That's great.
Two pits get noisy, so I will make them do that elsewhere. Yeah, so you can propose a bunch of different stuff to nouns, and they've backed a bunch of different projects of all sorts that I think also fit the mold of public goods. And so I think they're pretty that process. You need to find I think now you need to own 2 nouns maybe to propose to the DAO, and then there's a vote on whether to fund that proposal. I'm working with another friend on this. We're building a decentralized media organization around IP, or like the thinking about IP kind of. And he's got a bunch of friends at the BBC. We're going to put this podcast together. It's going to be kind of a general audience podcast, really on the history of intellectual property and media business models. But then further into that, it's going to be focused on nouns, and nouns is we're going to go and propose to nouns to fund that. And so I'll let you know how that goes, but I think that could be another mechanism that we could think about. Oh, what are the ways to pull some of these different pieces together, or what's a different way to get funds out of folks that have funds for these things, and it's just how to shape it into a proposal that meets their kind of idea for how it propagates their IP, which is I think pretty broadly defined.
They were at the Boulder blockchain last night. I don't know if it was someone who was a part of nouns, but the way they spoke, they talked about it a while, and the person that was talking about it had a very deep knowledge of it. And it was fascinating to me because I'd heard of it, but I didn't know anything about it really. And it's just a memification of nouns, which I still don't understand, but it's got a ton of money.
It's a massive decentralized organization, and it's not just there's certainly the folks who own nouns themselves, which are quite pricey to own, and it's been going for a little bit over a year, so there's probably around 400 or so nouns that have been distributed. 10% of those are to the nounders, the folks that founded the thing, but there's all of those folks then hold voting rights in where this treasury goes, and so as they're auctioned off, that money goes into the treasury, and then everybody shares where the thing. Oh, wow, it's even farther up there than I thought, 482, and so that's one part of the ecosystem, but there's lots of others. So there's lots of derivative projects that are creating things off of this that are related. Some of those derivative projects then actually go and buy nouns themselves. And so, SharkDAO, for instance, is one you could look up that I'm in SharkDAO. SharkDAO owns 5 or 6 nouns that then has tokenized that into $shark to then, but so there's lots of ways this is really playing with experimenting with decentralized governance. And so you have lil nouns, you have forks of these things. So this whole thing is nounish in its respect, but there's no, other than those holding the nouns at the core of that thing, the idea is that all of this activity will ultimately lead to those being more valuable, and for folks participating in it. So it's a really interesting experiment in CC0 effectively, which is taken on a lot of momentum of late, because nouns is one of the few projects that continues to show some momentum through the bear. So
I would mention actually, there's one thing I know about Nouns DAO from researching BitDAO, which is that somebody at the BitDAO, one of their investors must have a stake in that project. I don't know which one, but they do have some serious capital backing them, and they seem to be promoting them actively through other, very well more well-funded projects. So there is a lot of marketing going on for Nouns DAO just everywhere.
Yeah.
The VCs have a lot of capital.
And a bunch of the folks who have bought up Nouns, like there's definitely venture funds, NFT funds that have bought a bunch of these that are then feeding elsewhere. And the Nounders themselves are involved in other, Dom Hoffman is one of these, very famous characters in Web3 and has a bunch of other, so they're all kind of related in various ways, but it's yeah, they're trying to aggressively, I think I don't know if they've shut it down yet, but they're going to shut down the Discord actually as a way to no longer have a single official anything and let those things pop up to allow it to be even more decentralized. So they're really at the forefront of experimenting with a lot of these governance designs. And I think they're a really interesting model to look at for a bunch of that. So that could be an interesting place for JournoDAO to report on, is like, what is Nouns is like an interesting thing, right? And so how to bring those things to a general audience and then get it funded by Nouns itself is actually, I think, a pretty potent project potentially. So.
Do they have an objective of like funding public goods? Because somebody had alluded to this last night, that they think maybe they'll use the treasury to fund public goods or to fund other projects, or is it just right now just an experiment on memification to see if we can build big treasuries and governance? Or do you know?
I think their sole objective is to propagate Nouns IP, and so a lot of how they see that happening though is through public goods. And so it will be things like, I think there's a skate park that they are funding that will have like little Nouns characters on them. So a lot of it is like, oh, public goods with this brand on it then becomes something that feeds back into this ecosystem that drives more attention, more demand for Nouns, whatever else. And then those holding those Nouns, that's how the value accrues, right? Is by having more people thinking fondly of this brand and aware of this brand. And so it's a really interesting new model that has not really existed before. And so I think that's part of why it's so curious and why there's a lot of attention and participation across the ecosystem. And how do you get involved in that? Like, so people will, this was a thing for a while where people would spin up PFPs, sell them, and then use it to buy Nouns, so then they participate in the Nouns ecosystem. And so there's a bunch of folks that did that. Like one was called Goop, one was called HeadDAO. There's a few others that have and I think there's a bunch of folks who have started cataloging all of the very Nounish kind of empire stuff. And so it's very, and like Loot is another one to pay attention to, right? So in the storytelling that's going on in Loot, and I know there's a New Zealand filmmaker that I'm friends with who's starting to do some work with Tim Shell, who's one of the guys organizing the Loot ecosystem. And so that could be another place where I know that they also have funds that they were doing some matching fund stuff through Gitcoin, but I think there's some other folks affiliated with that. Like I know the guy from Figma, that I'm blanking on the CEO's name. Forget the CEO of Figma, but anyways, he's deeply involved, that has funded some of that stuff too, and has funded a fund for folks focused on the Loot ecosystem, which is a bunch of people building around these assets that for a game that didn't exist yet, now they're making these games exist. And so I think those are both really good examples. And Dom obviously is involved in both of them, but I think there's a lot of rhyming stuff across those two communities.
So it's almost like commodification of public goods to support the growth of IP. That is like that's like a mind fuck right there. Like I gotta reverse engineer that for a sec.
Yeah,
that's weird. I just never heard of that before.
Yep. Yeah, that's the idea. And there's a lot of experimentation going on around the Creative Commons licenses too. And so there's some folks in kernel that I'm working on some other stuff on that front of like, can we think of other ways of bringing, what does this look like for NFTs, and kind of start pulling Creative Commons folks that way. So there's a guy, Kyle Smith, I don't know if you ever run into him. He goes by Best Ape. He's awesome. He's one of the core contributors of LexDAO, the large legal community, and so we've been working on some of this stuff too. It's like, how do we think about NFT metadata? He's been doing that a lot for music, like DDEX and a bunch of these folks that are trying to organize the existing labels and folks around, kind of NFTs for music. But we're thinking about how to do this across a lot of different categories. And so, yeah, he's involved in a lot of that stuff too.
seems like what is it? What's Diamond DAO's product? Chainverse.
Yeah.
Chambers.
Seems like Chainverse would just want to take your brain and import it into there. Trying to make all those connections and stuff.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I love all that. I also love that. I can't tell if like if that's actual like a live feed of John Nicholas driving, because it could just be
Right?
like a GIF. Like it almost looks like just a GIF. Oh, look at that! Like
You're just like driving around like a rock star this whole time while we're talking. Like I love all of that.
That's all I ever do, gang.
Like cycling the security cameras during a heist.
Another thing I might just bring up to you guys though is that I do find the kernel community to be one of the best that I found in Web3. And so KB7 is going on right now, but KB8 is in a couple months, and it's each class is 250 some odd folks from all types of backgrounds around the world. It's artists, it's academics, it's builders, it's investors, it's, you know, it's all over the place. But I think these kind of conversations are definitely people that you can start pulling in from all different walks within kernel, and it's a pretty supporting, caring group of folks. So I think you guys would dig what is going on in there, and I would love to figure out how to cross-populate some of that, because I think there's a lot of folks that would love to both support this and also figure out how to kind of bridge some of these things to other communities.
in
Yep.
kernel, I looked into this months ago. It's kind of like a fellowship sort of structure.
Yeah, like the way I think about it more as like a decentralized university in some ways, where it's there's a application process, and largely through recommendations of fellows that have already kind of been in there, and it's really it's like maybe $400 or something, but it's also like there's lots of ways of getting support on those things, and it's largely just a peer-to-peer learning community. It's an 8-week thing. There's a fireside chat each week. So like Vitalik always shows up for the first one, and then it's kind of folks in the Web3 ecosystem, but it's largely organized around communities of care and public goods, and what is the responsibility we have of how we organize the future of the internet. And there's some just really exceptionally talented people from lots of different perspectives. There's a bunch of people working on indigenous protocols and regen stuff, and like it's pretty broad in terms of who's in there. But yeah, here's it's kernel.community, I think is the site. But yeah, I think just as you're thinking about a bunch of these things, it's so much of this I'm seeing across a number of different channels in kernel that I think would be pretty interesting to you guys.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Do you know who's funding kernel?
So it's a good question. So it was initially an offshoot of Gitcoin, right? So Vivek, who's one of the founders, was COO of Gitcoin, and then Andy, who's the other one who's kind of started this thing up together. They started it within Gitcoin. I think in some ways it was kind of populating more grantees to Gitcoin. It was like, how do you introduce people from all walks of life to what is interesting about Web3? And then a bunch of those projects would come out and get funded as companies, as protocols, and, what have you. They've since spun it out of Gitcoin. So there's, I was in KB5. KB6 was a blank block, effectively, to spin it out. And now kind of kernel's kind of building itself now and trying to keep itself more independently funded. And so I think they probably have grants from, I'm guessing, the Graph, IPFS, and a few other folks like that. There's definitely folks who are founders in that community have, I don't have a token yet, but they're thinking about how they build an endowment. And so that endowment is coming from commitments of folks who are builders who are in that ecosystem, who then commit some portion of their tokens back to the endowment for the university, effectively, to then continue funding itself. And so a lot of that is emergent. So I think it's still trying to figure out exactly how to do this over time. But given the value and the quality of the community, my feeling is that we'll figure this out effectively. But I think it's starting more in kind of these kind of grant making stuff. That they're not pursuing a venture path. So that's kind of the highlight.
This is very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's also honestly like I'd be excited I could set up convos with a bunch of these folks where then anybody can participate. I think having a conversation about what does Web3 journalism look like is one that would attract a whole bunch of people from the community. I'm doing this other weird thing called Biddle.fm. It's with a friend from Kernel that we're starting to play with how to create a decentralized whole Earth catalog effectively, that like Stuart Brand stuff. And so like how do we curate? It's essentially curation is care effectively. So how do we start curating tools, decentralized tools, resources, stories, and ways from these communities itself? And so a lot of this we've been talking about in Kernel is like, how does Kernel itself, there's lots of stuff going on in there. How do we start curating, telling the stories within Kernel back to the broader Kernel community and then out kind of more broadly? And so I think there's a lot of overlap there that we could start thinking about, that what are the ways that we can play that with JournoDAO. One of the places I'm starting there is with the Kernel library, which is like, how do we curate what books go into the Kernel library, so to speak, and like the syllabus. And the syllabus is kind of the starting point, but then it's, as we're always talking and recommending things to each other, how do we talk about what are the places that we point for that, and what are the ways that we keep those things in context, and how do we build tools for ourselves, for Kernel, for books? But then you start broadening that out, and so can we design an open standard for open standards around curating media for within communities? Is kind of where I think some of that stuff can go. And I think that overlaps a lot with this kind of decentralized journalism. Like, what does decentralized newsroom looks like? And how do you think about that curation process of who's contributing and who gets to say it goes into a publication or not? Like, these are the same, it's all the same patterns, right? So I think that's definitely an area I'd be very eager to like figure out how we bring you guys in to talk about the journalism side, and also think about like, hey, what does Kernel's newsletter look like? It doesn't really have a newsletter. What could it look like? And so I think that could be a really interesting place for us to hack on something together.
You're definitely in the right place.
Yeah. Thank you. I have to run. I'm heading down to that Opolis meetup down in Denver. So I'll fill you guys in when I get back. But thank you so much, Glenn, for all the input too. That was amazing. So
I'm so
joining us.
glad to find you guys. It feels like, yeah, it's awesome. I'm so excited about what you're doing and ways that we can play together. I think it'll be fun.
Very cool. Awesome. I'm gonna run.
All right,
See y'all later.
Crystal.
I've only got a couple minutes left as well. Let's see. Anything key we want to get to? Any Journo token updates or anything, Keith?
I've been working on that Twitter to Mastodon thing. I actually got the domain Twitter to Mastodon. I don't know if Twitter will sue me over it, but that'd be pretty interesting.
Have you guys looked at Farcaster at all, by chance?
Yeah, are you on there?
Yeah, I'm just seeing a huge amount of momentum within that community of folks building on it. So like I think that's the thing that has definitely piqued more of my interest there, is that it seems to be moving a lot faster than Lens was, and is definitely getting some momentum, and is shaped a little bit more like I could imagine, more kind of RSS plus is kind of the framing.
Yeah, I'd be interested as it opens up, like, because the whole thing with Mastodon, or my argument that I'm just like, I started to build like ways for you to just cross post on Mastodon from Twitter, and found a bunch of tools that already let you do that. So I was just going to do like a little micro site. And my argument is that, Web3 stuff is cool. Like right now, I feel like Farcaster's only invite only. As far as I know, it doesn't have like a API and all this stuff. And like Mastodon's been around since like 2016. And then once you make that move from Twitter to Mastodon, like once those like future Web3 social products come along, it's like super easy to just, export and then move on. And then like, you don't have to switch platforms ever again, because, the Web3 social will just let you take that with you everywhere. So it's more like, it's very like time boxed as far as like, okay, like Elon could be in charge of Twitter in like the next couple of weeks. Like, let's just get off, let's rip the Band-Aid off and like change contexts. So.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I might do a small plug for what we're doing at Meme, just because this is relevant to it, which is I think a lot about how effectively we're letting any community create their own agreements, and so they own their own agreements. It's kind of like not your contract, not your community, effectively. So like, how do communities have their own agreements, decide their own relations between their members and their relations between their members and digital objects, and have that governed by a contract that that community owns, controls, and can manage. And then ultimately, as you have those relations and you choose who occupies different roles, token enabled roles within that contract, effectively, that have different rights and responsibilities and permissions and economics, whatever it might be. The idea is we can start tying that contract ID to any tool, effectively, that is, so you can have it on Lens or Farcaster or Discord via Guild or any of these other things, but the data and the graph live with the community, and whatever you agree those responsibilities are, including hate speech provisions, whatever the thing is that allows you to continue to be in community with those folks. But that's decided amongst the human members of that thing. And then if you want to pull out Discord and plug in Slack or whatever else, they're in service of your contract effectively with each other. So I think that kind of very much the same thinking, but it's like, how do we start getting there? I think it's by using agreements as this kind of core unit of how do we organize, Web3 is, I kind of think about them as the version of what websites were for Web 1 is, agreements are for Web 3, and we're in like 1993, 94 in terms of like what the use cases are. But so I think some of that is like, how do we then move those communities with whatever those tools are, where it's not dependent on the tool. You don't build on the tool, you build your community, and then the community can choose what tool will respect its choices for affordances of how they want to communicate and what roles they have, that kind of thing. So yeah, we should chat more on that stuff. But I think that's like that's my frame of mind, at least in terms of where we can use as a jumping point. Like, so something like Mastodon makes a ton of sense, but it's like, okay, how do you make sure you're actually owning and controlling this stuff?
Yeah, definitely. What's the website for Meme? Or have you put one up yet?
Just maybe.
Yes.
Also, got a jet, unfortunate, but this has been a real pleasure to y'all. And yeah, thank you for the warm welcome and all the cool shit you guys are doing. I think there's a ton of things here that I'm super excited about. So I'm very, very glad to have stopped by and to have met you all.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. Look forward to continuing the conversation. And I've also got to log off, got a hard out here. But yeah, we can pick up some of the those other items. Nick, I'll follow up with you on some of those.
That's good. See ya.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Thanks. Bye.